The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
So let's dive into this month's topic, procuring A&E professional services. I'll give you a bit of an outline and we'll dive straight in. So number one, do a bit of background on A&E services. And then from there, I'm going to walk through a study that we had conducted to give you some stats and data about procuring A&E. But first, the background and resources. So if you're not familiar with the abbreviation, A&E is architecture and engineering services, of course. And what we want to go through here is just a few orienting comments on procuring architectural and engineering services. So first up is let's just visualize the typical contract arrangements for A&E services, because this comes into play for how you might procure. So for example, if you are hiring an architect and engineering team to put together the design of a vertical project. In other words, think buildings. That's what we mean by vertical projects. And then in a moment, I'll discuss horizontal projects such as roads and bridges and streets and things like that. So vertical projects are typically buildings. And usually what happens is your client organization will sign a contract directly with an architecture firm who then also brings aboard and organizes the other engineering disciplines and sub-consultants that are necessary to get all of the design put together. So that's the typical setup in a vertical project. On horizontal projects such as infrastructure, transportation, projects of those natures, typically an architect is not involved. They're typically, architects can be involved for a vertical building and how it's going to look and some of the architectural drawings within the building. Well, that doesn't necessarily apply to a road, for example. So usually the client organization will sign a contract directly with a lead engineering firm, but they'll also be bringing in other engineering professionals and sub-consultants to help the project. And the reason this is important is from a procurement point of view, the client will typically be considering not only the lead organization, so the architecture firm and or lead engineering firm, but will also be looking at the qualifications and proposal elements coming from these other key sub-consultants as well. So that's all part of it. So that's one brief item, just to give you a picture of who is being procured in these types of projects. Now, another thing is we did a whole session earlier, well, I guess it was more than a year ago now, January of 2023. If you go back to our Teaching Moments archive and you go to that video, we specifically addressed the topic of evaluating fee or cost proposals in an A&E procurement. That is a bit of a hot button topic. I won't rehash all of it since you can get to the recording there on our website, but I'll give you a few quick highlights and refreshers that are important to consider in A&E procurements. So first up is that the A&E industry typically prefers and advocates for a pure qualifications-based selection where fee is not at all a part of the evaluation, which is the opposite of this far left-hand side of an invitation to bid or invitation for bid, where we're only looking at price so long as the proposal is responsive and responsible. And of course, us at CPE are more in the RFP realm. We're looking at quite a bit of qualifications, but also considering price or fee. So just keep in mind that the A&E industry typically focuses on QBS or qualifications-based selection, no fee at all. And for many public sector organizations, the QBS method is often required by law. That's a requirement at the federal government level that all procurements of design professionals are done by pure qualifications and no fee. And then the vast majority of states have mirrored that. I think it's 47 of the 50 states have also mirrored the qualifications-based selection language. And then as you trickle down into other agencies and universities and municipalities, you start to get more variety the further away from the federal level that you are. But it's a reminder of that. This is the preference of your A&E external partners. We went through a lot of discussion in that last session back in January of last year about advocacy that the A&E industry does and how they're really focused on supporting QBS and trying to keep fee out of the evaluation process. We talked about that, gave some of the logic for that in there as well. Lucky, I see the question, can't we ask for unit price in the qualification process? It depends on your specific rules. The letter of the law for a federal agency and 47 of the 50 states is no, you can't ask for price or fee at all in any way, shape, or form, at least related to the A&E firm themselves. If it's a typical design services procurements. But if you are in an organization that is removed from the federal and state level, then you probably have different rules. I know, for example, I see Seattle City Light folks here on the call. They're a city, right? So it's, a different level removed from the state, but they typically follow at the city level pure qualifications-based selection for engineering and architectural services. So it depends on the specific agency is what I would say. But just know that the broader background and context is the industry professionals themselves are strongly supportive of pure qualifications-based selection. And they define that to mean zero information about fee. You negotiate that later after you've already identified the best qualified firm. So just keep that as a backdrop. We cover that in greater detail in that prior video. We gave a few thoughts that CPE has. Our first thought is kind of along the lines of Lucky's question there, which is first follow the rules that you have for your organization, obviously. But if you have flexibility, CPE is supportive of asking for fee. We are supportive of asking for fee, but you have to do it in the right way. And we covered the logic of why we are taking that position in the prior video. And we gave a whole number of things that the client organization must do if they're going to ask for fee. So if you're not going to follow these solid procurement practices in A&E setups, because they are all truly important to follow, then you're probably getting yourself into hot water and you're going to start getting complaints from the industry and things like that. So that's just a reminder of the prior video. Go check it out if you want more details on that. A few other comments by way of preliminary remarks are these. Number one is that client organizations who purchase A&E services are increasingly compressing design schedules, just scrunching things and trying to go faster and faster. Clients are also looking for ways to shave costs and becoming more price focused. There are some agencies that are going into hourly rates, kind of like Lucky said, unit pricing for design services. There are even some instances in the public sector of low bid design selection, which of course the industry is abhorred by. But that's just how it is. And there's reasons for that. I won't get into all of it, but just know that this is some of the backdrop. And then as a result of all these trends, you are seeing in the industry that the quality of design documents themselves is getting worse. And this is widely recognized across both the architecture and engineering industries as well as construction. Everyone essentially recognizes that this is the case, and it's logically justifiable, right? That if we're going to, as clients, shrink the design schedule and focus more on low bid, we're basically saying you have less time to put together the design, so stuff's going to fall through the cracks and get overlooked. And the more you focus on low bid and low hourly rates, then you're telling that the design industry that qualifications and skill doesn't matter. At least doesn't matter to the same extent. And so all of these trends are pushing for more errors and challenges. That's the result of it, I guess. So there you go. Now, like I see the other question here, are we supposed to sign the Association of Architects form of agreement instead of the client's own terms and conditions? Good question. I think what you're referring to there is that AIA in particular, which is the American Institute of Architects, and then, brother sister organizations across the border in Canada and so forth, because they do coordinate together. They do put out the famous AIA contract documents, which a lot of folks use. They're probably the most popular and widely used form of contract agreement in engineering and professional services, as well as alternative delivery for construction. And so they're very popular. But no, you are not required to use those. You can use your own terms and conditions. It's very common for public sector organizations to have essentially taken a template version of the architecture or the AIA architect's contract documents, but then mark them up and have their own standard version. So it's basically, it was loosely based on the original template, but then the client made some edits and red lines, and that becomes their base template. So for example, myself here working at University of Kansas, if you go to their website, they have their own version of AIA contract documents that are already marked up, and they're posted on the website, and it tells the industry, here are the contract documents that we are willing to sign. So yeah, can't really be strong-armed into terms and conditions. The client can determine those, but at the same time, the more you depart from what is standard in the industry, the more likely folks are to walk. So there's a bit of a balance there. All right, so finally, just laying out the, kind of how things are in the A&E industry as a broader environment is just one. I think you probably get this by now, but fee itself, whether you evaluate that, is a very hot button issue to architects and engineers. We talked about the fact that there's longstanding legislation against looking at fee in the evaluation process. It's called the Brooks Act, and then all the states have many Brooks Acts, or the vast majority of states. But we do think at CPE fee can and perhaps should be competed if you do so properly. It's just the way things are best set in our minds. Finally, the other thing to recognize is that clients themselves are, in fact, the primary source of pain and pressure in the design industry. We're increasingly treating the A&E professions as if they are a commodity, which is not reasonable. And we're seeing a lot more challenges to how public sector agencies, in particular, private as well, are not immune to this. Not being fair and following best practices and how they're procuring A&E services. You need to do that if you're going to ask for a fee, especially. So give you one other quick fun thing, just some of the traditional methods of how client groups will evaluate qualifications in design can lead to what I would call shenanigans. You may recognize this as the Space Needle up in Seattle. Decades ago, so this is decades old now, our group was involved in helping the state of Washington procure design services to do some upgrades for some other state projects. And in the presentations and interviews with the top 4 architecture firms, our group advocated for a particular type of interview and structure, but the client wanted the razzle-dazzle show, to have the architects come in and present their amazing portfolio of experiences. And the first architecture team comes in and says, hey, you see the Space Needle over there? Yeah, we did that. And of course, the client's evaluation team was like, boom, that's amazing. We got the Space Needle team. This is great. So they're all hyped up. Second architecture team comes in and is giving the razzle-dazzle show about their qualifications. Guess what they pop up? Here's a picture of the Space Needle, just from a slightly different angle. And we did that. And now we're confused. Wait a minute. Now 2 for 2 architecture firms are claiming they did the Space Needle. Well, fast forward, all 4 of the shortlisted architecture firms who are in the presentations claimed to have designed the Space Needle. They were all telling the truth. They had all done some real tiny, eensy-weensy, small upgrade or renovation or tiny thing so that they could therefore claim they had worked on the Space Needle. The reality is that none of them were the architect of record for the original projects, but they all tried to find some way to claim it because they figured it's the state of Washington. The project location was also going to be in the city of Seattle, so try to razzle-dazzle that client. So you come out of that and you're going, whoa, watch out. How you look at past performance and qualifications can lead to some silly things. You can't just leave it to be the razzle-dazzle show. So with that in mind, we wanted to look at some actual data around a number of A&E procurements that our group has conducted here. So this is coming from a past research study that we had conducted. So this is 122 public sector A&E procurements across the US and Canada. There were 804 individual proposals across those 122 projects. So you're talking 6 or 7 proposals per project on average. And then all of these were procured via an RFP, where fee was in fact included in the evaluation process. It was a 2-envelope fee evaluation with a limited weight standard forms. I'll cover that here in a moment. But this is essentially trying to show you what are some of the outcomes you can expect if you follow all of the CPE recommendations in A&E procurements, and you do include fee as part of that. So what does that look like? What are those outcomes going to be? So the things we were trying to solve in the research study were these 2 questions. Number 1, what are the selection outcomes in that type of a best value RFP procurement process for A&E services? Like, what do you see when it's not pure qualifications-based selection? It's more of an RFP setup that's following those best practices that CPE recommends. Number two is, which evaluation criteria are most effective at differentiating qualifications of competing A&E firms, given that there can be some shenanigans in how the qualifications-based evaluation process occurs. If you want the full study, it is published through the Journal of Architectural Engineering and put out by the American Society of Civil Engineers. I do think if you go to the website to try to get the study itself, it's behind a paywall. So if you want a copy of the raw, nerdy academic study, just email me and I can send it to you. But let's go through the results. So research question 1. What happens when you use a 2-envelope fee evaluation in a best value scenario to procure A&E services? Let's go through what these results look like. So to walk you through the general evaluation process that was used in these projects, it was done like this. So first, we did get fee submitted, and that was held separate in a 2-envelope process. We got past performance, experience, and then some technical proposal elements. We did have some blind and anonymous page limit elements there as well. From there, we shortlisted down to do interviews, and the interviews are with the top 2 to 3 project roles, one-on-one, standardized format, no razzle-dazzle presentation. It was purely a job interview. I'm happy to discuss that further, but very structured format of how to approach the interviews, essentially. If you want more details on this specific evaluation process, I don't want to spend all the time here today covering it. If you go back to our Teaching Moment archive on the websites, and then you look back for a couple years ago in January of 2022, there's a video titled "It's a New Year, Ready for the Next Level," where we went through this exact style of evaluation process in greater detail, walked through Simplar's XPD approach. That's how this was all procured, all that good stuff. Skip all of that. Okay. Here's the evaluation weights and how it was set up in these A&E procurements as a part of the study. So we did look at fee, but we kept it light because it is a design project. The scope is not very well set at this stage. And so you're just trying to have some fee visibility in the evaluation process. You don't want this to be a heavy weight. So on average, it was about 15% of the evaluation, but you can see there's a range in there depending upon the setup and the amount of background information the client had available. We did have schedule for a number of the projects. I don't necessarily recommend that, so I'd be really careful about competing a schedule. I can comment on that later if you'd like. Technical proposal, it was made up of multiple elements, but basically it was a future-looking plan being proposed by the architects and engineers as a part of the team. We looked at past performance or qualifications in a couple different ways: past performance of the individual people, and then portfolio of experience of the firms, and then that project team interview, specifically one-on-one with 2 to 4 key people from each proposing team. So that was the setup. Now, to answer the first research question, we'll go through the outcomes, like what happens, what are the outcomes you can expect in that type of a procurement setup. So I'm going to give you this first. We're going to take a look at it from number 1 ranked qualification firm all the way through, worse or lower. So we're going to go from absolute best qualified according to our evaluation panel all the way to lower. Remember, there's about 6 or 7 proposals coming in on average per project. And we're also going to take a look at fee. And so what I look at here is we're going to go from number 1 fee means the cheapest, or in other words, the best from the perspective of the client, all the way through most expensive. So I'm going to give you this big table, right, where it's looking at this upper left-hand corner is going to be best qualified and cheapest fee, and everything kind of goes off of that. So let me give you the outcomes here. Interpret these for you as well. So this number here, 22% of the time, what we were seeing is that the single best qualified firm also happened to be the lowest fee, which is interesting. So call that a fifth or a quarter of the time, somewhere in the middle of that, right? Is you're getting the best of both worlds in this approach. That absolute best qualified team also happened to be the cheapest, which is interesting. If you expand that and say, I want the lowest fee, but maybe the top 2 qualified firms that were competing, that's 40% of the time. So nearly half of the time you're getting a really competitive fee, the most competitive fee, but top 2 qualified. If you expand that to these 4, you're getting almost 60% of the time, you're getting top 2 in each. So you're getting at worst number 2 fee and number 2 qualifications. That's 8% of the time here. But you add it all up, if you're getting top 2 in both areas of qualifications and fee happening in the majority of cases. If I total things up and interpret some of that, overall, we were selecting the best qualified firm and team more than half the time. And simultaneously, nearly half the time, we were selecting the lowest fee, right? So basically what this is all telling you is that an RFP and best value style approach, if done well, if done in accordance with best practices, is going to get you some well-balanced results, right? You really are getting the best value when it comes to procuring solid A&E professional teams. We also took a look at the selected A&E firms in all of those cases and compared them against the average competitor. Overall, still getting cheaper fees, much better technical proposals, solid past performance, and then solid team interviews. Bringing us to the second research question here, which is which evaluation criteria were most effective at differentiating the qualifications of the A&E teams? I'm going to give you some nerdy math here, so hang with me. I'm going to show you the variation in scores. So what this one here means is that for fee, let's assume that you got a fee of $100 coming back as the average market rates, just to pick a round number, right? So if the average fee was $100, this plus or minus 25% is saying that, roughly speaking, the fees range from 75 to 125, if that makes sense. That's what plus or minus 25% around the average or around the market rate is what it's showing you there. So there's that. Schedule also saw pretty similar dispersion or variation in what was proposed. Project team interviews right there as well as having quite a bit of variation in the evaluation scores themselves. Now, technical proposal a little lower, and then all the past performance elements were lower still. So we did all the nerdy statistics. It's in the research paper. So what the nerdy statistics showed you is there's really 3 groupings of criteria. These first 3 have high variation in scores. In other words, they are effective at differentiating between, top to bottom. There's more dispersion there. There's more variation. Moderate was the technical proposal elements, and then low differentiation would be the past performance criteria there. So those are the 3 groupings in terms of just which is most likely as a criteria to get you differences in evaluation scores and help you select. So statistically, the best way to differentiate qualifications, if you put aside fee and schedule, if you just look at qualifications, it was interviews with the actual project team leads. And these are interviews. This is not sales. This is not principals coming in, not executives coming in. That's where we found the most differentiation. Number 2, fee was pretty highly variable, right? It was plus or minus 25%. So one way of interpreting that is to say, like, when fee is so variable there, it kind of justifies including it in the evaluation, right? You want to make sure you're getting a competitive deal, if it is kind of what that's saying. Now, keep in mind, however, I'm showing you plus or minus 25%. So it's plus or minus 25% of market rate. Well, if you think about market rate for an A&E firm, like typically you're getting fees that are 7 to 10% of the total construction budget. So a 1 or 2% difference in fee on a 7 to 10% range of fees of construction budget, 1 or 2% out of 7 is a pretty big change. So just the way that architectural engineering fees are set up to begin with might kind of artificially lead to some of that. So yeah, a 25% difference in fee really translates to maybe a +1 percentage point on the total cost out of construction budget. So, keep that in mind. It is scaled to the size of the design contract. And then last but not least is I do want to say that although schedule was included as an evaluation criteria in a number of the projects, although not all, in general, our best practice, and those of you who have taken the Better RFPs classes with us already know this, that we do recommend publishing the client's intended schedule duration or target dates and not just leaving that wide open to the industry. You want apples to apples proposals coming back. The largest single cost driver in A&E is overhead, which is a monthly cost. And so if you allow A&E firms to come up with their own schedules, then whoever assumes the fastest schedule and the most responsive client is going to be the cheapest. That's just how it's going to be. I've seen it play out too many times. We have some training slides on all of that. The best practice is to define what you think is a reasonable schedule for your client organization tied to actual dates on the project, if applicable. And then, yeah, you can allow innovation or adjustment off of that. What would it take to extend that schedule? What are the benefits? What would it look like if we accelerated that schedule? What are the benefits? But at least get fees across a consistent schedule duration, because that's a big driver of cost. Okay, so in summary, procuring A&E services definitely has some of its own unique elements. Check out that prior video on whether fee can be injected and things like that. It's a very hot button topic for sure. I would say that of all the different project types that you can have come across your desk as a procurement professional, A&E services are among the external A&E providers are among the most touchy in terms of how you procure. And you'll hear about it if you touch the hot buttons. RFPs, however, can be a very effective tool if used properly. They do get you a pretty solid best value results. And I would just say focusing on qualifications of the individual team members as much as possible. So those lead roles that would actually be assigned to your project is a big deal. Don't get yourself into a Seattle Space Needle scenario where everyone's claiming these broad and vague qualifications or portfolio elements of their firm just generically. Now, focus on the key people because they're the ones who are going to provide the brain power to actually deliver your projects. And that's really all A&E services are. You're hiring people for their brain to help you design something and figure something out. And yeah, do they put it into construction drawings and renderings and things like that? But ultimately, it's brain power of the key people that you're going to hire. So the more you focus on the individual roles, the better off your procurement typically becomes. So with that brings us to the end of our A&E professional services discussion. One reminder for you is if you would like the continuing education units here, go to centerforprocurement.org/CEU. And once this link is up, hopefully it's up by tomorrow and working again, you can fill it out as put into the chat there. The code, put it in the chat one more time. The code to get your CEU credits is 1865. So write that down, go over to your to that link here. We'll hopefully get an announcement out to you when it's back up and running, but we've got confirmation it should be tonight that it's working again for this month, March, for the topic and the questions. Since we're here, and I'm bummed to tell you that it's not working. Let me give you what the 2 questions are going to be to help you out here.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.